In the year 1900, the greatest empire in Asia was forced to kneel. Foreign soldiers marched into Beijing, not as guests, but as masters. Palaces were looted. Civilians were executed. Temples were stripped bare. This wasn't a war. It was a public humiliation carried out by 8 nations at once. China was bleeding from within. The Qing dynasty struggled to hold itself together. Torn by corruption, rebellion, and famine, across the empire, ordinary people lived in fear, not of each other, but of a power they could not fight. 8 nations saw this weakness, and they moved. Not for justice, not for peace, but for control, for profit, for territory. Britain wanted trade. France wanted influence. Germany wanted to prove its strength. Russia wanted land. Japan wanted a foothold in Asia. The United States, Italy, Austria, Hungary, they all came, drawn by opportunity. They did not fight a proxy war. They did not march in the name of another empire. They came for China itself, an empire once proud, now vulnerable. And so, in the summer of 1900, foreign boots filled the streets of Beijing. Cannons roared. Palaces burned. Villagers fled, only to be hunted down. The world called it a suppression of rebellion, but it was something far darker. It was a warning, a punishment, a demonstration that power would always bend the weak to its will. And the cost would be paid in blood and loss, and in the humiliation of an entire civilization. The streets of Beijing were not empty. They were filled with fear. Farmers abandoned their fields, clutching children to their chests. Women hid in alleyways, praying that the invaders would pass them by. Monks and scholars, custodians of centuries of knowledge, were dragged from temples and beaten for daring to stay. Villages outside the city burned. Smoke twisted into the sky like a warning. Families vanished in a single night. Mothers wept for sons, brothers searched for sisters, and children cried for parents who would never return. No one was safe. No one was spared. It did not matter if you were rich or poor, young or old, soldier or peasant. The 8 nations did not distinguish between combatant and civilian. They only saw China, weak and vulnerable, and the cost of resistance. And in the shadows of their conquest, countless lives were extinguished quietly, forgotten by history, yet never forgotten by the land itself. The pain of the innocent became the true price of humiliation. How many lives were lost during those dark months of 1900? No one knows for certain. Conservative estimates count tens of thousands, but the true number may have been far higher. Entire villages disappeared overnight. Bodies floated down the rivers, uncounted, unnamed, unremembered. Farmers, mothers, children slaughtered alongside soldiers in a war they never asked for. Streets once alive with commerce and laughter became silent graves. Temples became prisons. Homes became tombs. Historians speak of the damage in silver, in treaties, in foreign boots on Chinese soil. But the greatest cost was human. Lives erased, families broken, futures stolen. And the world moved on, recording only what it chose to see. This was not a battle. This was extermination by numbers. A civilization's pain reduced to statistics. A warning to anyone who dared resist. 8 nations came, not for peace, not for diplomacy. They came for power, for control, for China itself. Britain, France, Germany, Russia, Japan, Italy, Austria-Hungary, the United States. Each had its own reason, but together, they formed a force no empire could withstand. Britain, trade and dominance, attacked Beijing via Tianjin and coastal ports. Heavy artillery and naval support, captured towns and villages along supply routes. France, missionaries and influence, targeted northern China, especially areas around Beijing. Infantry and artillery combined with British forces, burned villages suspected of supporting the Boxers. Germany, power demonstration, invaded via Shandong Peninsula, known for brutal punitive expeditions, executed civilians who resisted. Russia, territory and control, advanced from the north into Manchuria and toward Beijing, laid siege to towns and rural settlements, focused on destroying Boxer strongholds. Japan, rising empire seeking influence, attacked Tianjin and northern coastal towns, coordinated with Western forces to overwhelm defenders, focused on speed and shock attacks. Italy, Austria-Hungary, United States, opportunistic actors, Italy and Austria-Hungary mostly reinforced Allies' positions. The United States provided a smaller force but participated in key urban battles. All contributed to the rapid, overwhelming occupation of Beijing. The attack was relentless. Troops advanced in coordinated waves, artillery pounding city walls, cavalry sweeping through villages. The Boxers fought with sticks, swords, and faith. The Eight Nations fought with steel, cannons, and ruthless strategy. Beijing fell. Tianjin fell. Villages burned. Towns razed. Rivers ran with the blood of the innocent. This was not conquest. This was punishment. And the message was clear: resist, and this is what awaits you. Amidst the chaos, one group rose, not with foreign guns, but with anger, faith, and desperation. They called themselves the Boxers. Farmers, peasants, and young men, armed with sticks, swords, and ancient martial traditions. They believed they could resist the foreign invaders and restore China's honor. The Boxers were not trained soldiers. They were ordinary people, pushed to the edge by poverty, famine, and foreign exploitation. Missionaries and merchants, protected by powerful armies, had taken their land, their rights, their dignity. They became the spark that brought the Eight Nations together. The world saw them as fanatics. The Qing dynasty, desperate to maintain power, first hesitated, then secretly supported them. The Boxers fought in the streets of Beijing, in villages across northern China. They tried to stop cannon fire with prayer. They charged guns with swords. They believed their spirits were invincible, that foreign bullets would not harm them. And in doing so, they became the heart of the battle. Their resistance gave the Eight Nations a reason to escalate. Every attack, every execution, every looted temple, the Boxers were the reason the violence intensified. Without them, the Eight Nations might have withdrawn after suppressing minor rebellions. But the Boxers' defiance forced a full-scale invasion, a punishment campaign, and a humiliation that would echo for generations. The Boxers fought. The peasants resisted. But the Eight Nations had steel where China had sticks. Cannons roared. Streets ran with smoke. Beijing became a tomb. Foreign soldiers marched through villages like a tide of fire, leaving nothing untouched. Homes were burned. Temples looted. Sacred artifacts, centuries of Chinese history, were torn away and shipped abroad as trophies. Families were executed in public. Mothers wept as children were killed before their eyes. Villages were razed. Rivers carried the bodies of the innocent, floating silently to the sea. Punishment was precise and calculated. The invaders targeted Boxers first, but soon the innocent paid the price. No one could hide. No one could plead. The goal was clear: terrorize, humiliate, and teach the empire a lesson it would never forget. This was not war. It was collective punishment. Every blow, every act of destruction was a message: resist, and this is the fate that awaits you. China was broken, not just in land or power, but in spirit. The streets that once thrived with life now echoed with emptiness. The empire's dignity had been stripped away, and its people left to mourn in silence. The guns fell silent. The smoke cleared, but the suffering did not end. China had survived armies, but it had not survived humiliation. The Eight Nations demanded reparations. Millions of silver taels extracted from an already broken empire. Foreign troops occupied key cities. Sovereignty was shattered. Laws, trade, and culture were dictated not by the Qing dynasty, but by outsiders with guns and greed. Palaces were looted. Artifacts that had survived centuries were taken as trophies, ending up in foreign museums. Temples became barracks. Streets that once celebrated life now whispered only fear and shame. It was a defeat that no sword or treaty could fully measure. The empire had lost not only battles, but its pride. For generations, the people remembered, not the armies or strategies, but the weight of being humiliated on their own soil. And the world moved on, recording treaties, counting silver, marking dates. While the true cost, the dignity of a civilization, was gone. More than a century has passed, yet the scars of 1900 remain etched in China's memory. The humiliation of the Eight-Nation invasion was not just a chapter in a history book. It was a wound, a lesson in power, greed, and the cost of weakness. Generations grew up with stories of villages burned, families lost, and a civilization forced to bend. China's mistrust of foreign powers, its desire for strength and sovereignty, all trace back to this dark chapter. And yet, the story does not end here. The pain, the invasion, the loss of dignity. History was not done testing China. Decades later, a new threat would rise from the east, a power even more ruthless. With new weapons and unrelenting ambition, China would face occupation again, under the shadow of an empire from the rising sun. But that is a story for another time. If you want to uncover what happens next and see history's darkest chapters revealed in full, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the next episode, The Japanese Occupation of China.